could tell from the responses that we've got a lot of folks that are interested in science and technology on that list, as well as on Kent's list, his mailing list, so we're grateful to them. Our series is funded in part by Chevron, and we're grateful to them. For those of you who have attended these before, you know that we are trying to do a series now on Congress and the public opinion and the media. This sort of fits in the media sense, I guess, but we really wanted to do something on the cyber threat just because the issue is of such great importance today. Before I introduce the program and our panelists, I want to apologize for the fact that our keynote speaker, Howard Schmidt, the White House coordinator for cybersecurity, had to bail at the last minute because of a calendar conflict. We really had gone through a lot of hoops and hurdles over the last month, over a month actually, to try to accommodate his schedule, but I guess that's how things are at the White House. I know he did have a briefing at 6 o'clock with Mr. Brennan, but we had promised to get him out of here before 5 so he could get back in plenty of time, but something else may well have come up. It's not my job usually to editorialize as your moderator, but I did express extreme disappointment with his office and said I thought that was unacceptable at the last minute, but I understand from some of my fellow panelists that the President and his staff do have priority when something does come up, so I won't feel too insulted. The good news is that we still have a very dynamic group of experts on our panel that will lead us in an informative and I'm sure very lively discussion. Earlier last week, I was informed by Lieutenant Colonel Hare that there was a chance he might be called out of town on an exercise that was going to be taking place, and so I took the precaution of lining up a backup person just in case, and that's Ellen Nakashima with the Washington Post. Turns out that Lieutenant Hare is here, but she has been gracious enough to fill in for the other occupancy that just arrived on the panel more recently. So we thank you, Ellen, for agreeing to do this on such short notice. The cybersecurity threat to our nation is one of the most difficult challenges that we have ever faced for a variety of reasons. We don't know where the threats of attacks are originating, who the perpetrators are, what their targets will be, or what sophisticated means of attack they will use given the ever-changing nature of technologies. Add to that the lack of adequate federal-private sector coordination to address these risks, and keep in mind that 85 to 95% of cyberspace is really privately owned and operated. And you have all the makings of a national disaster of the first order that could bring not only our country but the world economy to its knees. As if we haven't had a close enough call with that recently with other miscalculations. I won't go any further than that because we do have, as I say, an excellent panel to discuss what's at risk and why, what is and isn't being done to meet the serious challenge. Suffice to say that the more you learn about this, and I've been doing sort of a crash course over the last few weeks, the more you learn about this, the scarier it gets. You all have the panel bios in your handouts. For those of you who are watching on our live webcast, they're available on our website as well. And speaking of the live webcast, if you have any electronic devices, please turn them off, as that they will interfere with our audio system in the transmission of that webcast. We're also pleased to have with us today C-SPAN, who is recording this for a later rebroadcast. Each of our panelists will speak for approximately 15 minutes, after which we'll mix it up a little among the panelists with follow-up comments and questions, and then we'll open the floor up to questions from our audience. Following the program, there'll be a brief reception in the atrium just outside of this room, and you're all invited, encouraged to attend that, and we could continue our dialogue in a more informal setting. So just briefly, our panelists will be in the following order, and I'll give you just a little bit of background on each. Our first speaker will be Marcus Sachs, who is the Executive Director for National Security and Cyber Policy for Verizon Communications. He had a very distinguished 20-year career with the U.S. Army and then made a nice little transition to the White House, where he worked in the Cybersecurity Office in 2002 and 2003. He's also served on the Center for Strategic and International Studies Commission on Cybersecurity, which issued a very important report in, I think, December of 2008, advising the 44th President, Mr. Obama, on some things that needed to be done in the area of cybersecurity. So they were very instrumental in then the 60-day policy review and subsequent report that was made by the White House, and we'll hear more about that as this program goes on. Our second speaker will be Deborah Parkinson, who since 2003 has been on the professional staff of the Senate Homeland Security Committee. And I should say Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Got to get the whole title in. She's currently with the full committee and its chairman, Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, previously served with a subcommittee on oversight and government management. Our third speaker will be Lieutenant Colonel Forrest B. Hare, who currently serves in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, where he is responsible for overseeing the Defense Department's information operations to ensure compliance with national defense and warfighter requirements. He works closely with the Congress, the combatant commands, and military services to develop and integrate information operations. During his career with the Air Force, he has served in numerous postings, including South Korea, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Germany, and has taught at the Air Force Academy. And last but not least, and we always have a cleanup hitter spot open for a journalist, Ellen Nakashima is reporter for the Washington Post, where she's worked since 1995. She currently covers cyber issues with a focus on cyber and surveillance. She covered Al Gore's presidential campaign in 2000 and has reported on Homeland Security post 9/11, privacy, technology, and security issues. With that, I'll turn things over to Marcus Sachs. And panelists may either present from the podium or from their places.
Thank you, Don. And I'll just sit right here, or I think that'd be just fine. A couple of things I'm going to emphasize over and over. First off is it doesn't have to be this way. In other words, cyberspace does not have to be insecure. And the second thing is it's all man-made. So we built it, we can change it. And I'll kind of revisit those 2 points over and over. Most of us are aware that what we call cyberspace today, we tend to think of as synonymous with the Internet. There is a lot more to cyberspace than the Internet, but that is really the focal point where we look at the threats and the emerging problems. The Internet has its roots back in two big, large experiments, the ARPANET, the NSFNet, and several others, and I think all of you are very aware of the history of how we got to where we are. If you go back 40 years ago to the early 70s, as this was all coming of age, threats in cyberspace were very, very different from what they are today. In fact, the biggest threat in those days was the network itself. Could the network support the movement of all the information between the large mainframes that were being connected together? The concept of a network was even somewhat foreign because we were just connecting point to point, one Unix mainframe to another Unix mainframe. How do we bring in a third? Oh, we have to do this thing called a network. Well, the threat then being very network-centric assumed then that the people on the edges, the researchers, the administrators, and those could be trusted. And in fact, they could because most of them knew each other. As time went by over the next few years, protocols began to emerge, IP, TCP, FTP, Telnet, things we're very familiar with today, but they emerged in a world where the trust model was very, very different. Again, the people on the edges trusted each other. The network was where the problems were. So the protocols began to reflect that. The actual essence, the soul of the networks, was optimized to trust the edges and don't trust the middle. Now fast forward to 2010, today. We went through a big transition back in the early to mid-90s when the NSFNet, ARPANET, and all were more or less turned off. We brought in citizens of the world, governments, and so forth. So today the edge is not trustworthy, but the middle of it, the network, is very trustworthy. In fact, we have very few network outages anymore. The network's highly reliable. The protocols, though, that were developed almost 40 years ago still reflect that old trust model. So they're still optimized for trust on the edges, no trust in the middle, when in fact today what we see on the Internet and other types of networks is lots of trust in the middle and no trust on the edges. And we have to wonder, why do we have the problems in cyberspace that we do? And a lot of it is directly attributable to the way this has all evolved over time. So again, it doesn't have to be that way. This is just the way it has evolved. It doesn't have to stay like that. Mankind has built this. We can change it. So if you look at the way the threats evolved in the 70s, again, not a whole lot of problems of attacking because the networks had their own problems. But in the 80s, we began to see a lot of hypothetical attacks. Papers were being published. First types of test viruses, test malware, people messing around, see what they could do. And in 1988 was the big turning point, the Morris worm. Many of you probably remember Morris, which was not designed to do anything damaging. It was essentially going to go out and count all the hosts then connected to the ARPANET. But it got out of control, started to replicate, spread, and eventually roughly a third or so of the ARPANET became unusable. After some time, they had to literally turn machines off, turn networks off in order to capture and contain and prevent the damage. But we learned from that. It is possible to create a series of ones and zeros that you can spread on a network that does cause network damage. In the 1990s, as these networks opened up to the general public, there was a shift again. So remember the 1970s, not a lot of attacks because the network itself was a big deal. 1980s, mostly academic. 1990s, as everybody starts to come into the network, this was the era of the script kiddies, the website defacements, all the hacking clubs. You probably remember all those days where, I mean, not a day didn't go by, but something was in the paper about a certain website got defaced. I mean, big high-profile ones, the White House taken down, FBI taken down, private sector sites. But all of this was very adolescent, very teenager-minded, very noisy. They wanted to make a name for themselves, almost like spray painting graffiti. Then we go through September 11th. In the days following that, I was asked to come join the staff at the White House. And our big concern in 2002, and just the weeks and months following the September 11th attacks at the end of 2001, was that the threats were going to evolve from being that script kiddie teenager type, into being very oriented on terrorists and terrorism, and that attacks against the network would occur by the terrorist groups. Literally, they would terrorize us by doing attacks against the Internet. Well, now upon reflection, look back over the past decade, we don't have any cases that we know of where terrorists have terrorized us by terrorizing the Internet. In fact, it turns out the terrorists are highly dependent on the Internet. Why would they attack something that they need to use for communication, for the movement of money, for all the things that terrorist groups do? In fact, they function very much like organized crime when it comes to the Internet. And in some cases, terrorist groups and organized crime groups are indistinguishable on the Internet. So today we're sort of learning that the terrorist groups were not really the problem. What we were not seeing, we were really not concentrating on in the early part of the last decade, was the growth of cybercrime. And that's really what has happened in the last 10 years. Cybercrime started off as just a nuisance thing. We had a few banks that were being robbed in cyberspace. We had some gangs operating in the 90s. But after about 2003, 2004, roughly, there was a big inflection point where the phishing attacks, theft of intellectual property, theft of personal information really started to take off. And this is where we sit today. Most of the threats in cyberspace are oriented on cybercrime. Underneath all this, largely invisible to the average user, is cyber espionage, where two nations are spying on each other. And you have to remember this is a fairly normal thing as well. Nations have always spied on each other using different technologies that have been available over the hundreds or thousands of years. So espionage in cyberspace should be no surprise. And in fact, if you reflect back on the Cold War and how expensive it was for the United States or the Soviet Union or somebody to train a spy, using the Internet where you can literally sit at a computer screen thousands of miles away and collect the same information that it would have taken years of training and millions of dollars of resources to go collect, why wouldn't you use the Internet? And we leave so much stuff out there, so much that we don't have to put online that our adversaries have ready access to. That cyber spying is not just military spying on each other. It's corporations spying on each other. It's countries spying on corporations on behalf of their own. There's quite a bit of evidence now that's been presented of factories in Southeast Asia. In fact, this was given in testimony in the Senate several months ago. Factories in Southeast Asia that are exact copies of factories here in the United States. Why are they exact copies? Well, foreign agents have been able to literally break in, steal the blueprints, take photographs from the cameras that belong to those companies, overhead images, whatever it takes, build a brand new factory, a textile mill, whatever. It now competes openly with a U.S. plant, and in fact can compete at a much cheaper price. Knocking U.S. industries offline because they're making copies of what we have. This is the world we live in 2010. You have to now wonder, well, what does the next decade look like? If the 90s was script kiddies and adolescents, and the 2000s were more of a value-oriented crime and espionage, what happens in the 2010s? Well, if you watch the technologies, the big wave that's coming is cloud computing. We've all probably heard that term. Cloud computing offers a lot of good things for the good world. It also offers a lot of good things for the bad world. For example, creating fake clouds, fake information, fake networks. We're beginning to see this happen on the physical side. There's a lot of fake equipment, in other words, counterfeit equipment, available on the market. Studies that have been done by the federal government as well as the private sector are estimating approximately 10% of all hardware today available on the open market is counterfeit. And you can go to many of these websites and you can find it. If a line card from a large manufacturer normally costs $1,000 and you can buy it for $99.95 or $50 or less online, there's probably a reason why you're getting it so inexpensively. FBI, DOJ has done quite a bit of investigations in this. Defense Department has as well. So if our adversaries are creating fake hardware, What's to keep them from creating fake networks, fake clouds, fake information? And that may be what we're going to see as this evolution continues into the coming decade. So now bring this back to what we're here to talk about, and that is, is there a policy position? Is there something the United States should be thinking about? What's the role of the Congress, the role of the President, the role of us in society to address these types of changing threats? One of the things that we lack, and I'm guilty of this, when I was at the White House we failed to do this, and I was hoping this would happen in the last few years, but what still needs to happen is a national policy on what is cyberspace. What is it about for our country? Is it a military place where we fight future battles? Is it a place for economic prosperity? What is it? Or is it something else, something to be defined? My fellow panelists here are going to talk about other pieces of this, but it's the world we need to start really coming to grips with, a statement or a vision or a policy of what exactly is cyberspace. Because remember, it's man-made, so whatever we want it to be is what we can build it to be. If we want it to be a domain for warfighting, well, we can build it that way. We can optimize it to fight wars in. We can make it contestable. If we want to build it as a place for economic prosperity, we can do that too. In fact, we can code all this stuff. It's all ones and zeros. It's all software. It's all man-made. We can completely make this look like we want it to look like. But what we need is some type of national direction, some statement, something. If Howard were here today, I would ask him to say that. What are we going to do? How are we going to declare cyberspace? Then we can turn to our partners over on the Congress and say, okay, given this direction, what do we need to do in terms of laws? Are there old laws we need to change, new laws we need to write, new oversight, things like that to carry us in that direction? And I would turn to my peers in the private sector. What can we do to enable that vision? How can we change cyberspace? How can we adopt and adapt inside that world? But that type of leadership is what we need, and it has to happen this year, 2010. It's becoming too complex, too much scattering, too much going on. We need to be able to show that leadership as a country. We need to show other countries that we are a thought leader in this. What I am afraid we're going to see is some other country step up to the plate. Somebody else is going to take charge of this. Somebody else will show the leadership, and then we have to then follow their action. So again, it doesn't have to be this way, and we built it. It's man-made. We can change it. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deborah?
Thank you very much. As Don mentioned, I work for Senator Lieberman on the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. I appreciate the invitation to join you here today, and I say it's especially fun for me as someone who was an intern at the Wilson Center when I was in grad school, so it's interesting to be on this side of the table. I think that my fellow panelists are probably going to cover the technical issues, the cyber threat issues, much better than I can. And I'm going to stick with what I believe I was asked to come here to talk about today, which is really to give a view from the Hill. So I've been asked to discuss ongoing activities, challenges that we've encountered, and to prognosticate a little bit about the future of cybersecurity legislation. Although since there are so many cameras here, I might have to be careful about what I what I say. I started handling cybersecurity issues for the committee about 3 years ago. I morphed into this role after handling infrastructure protection. And as I would say 2007 was when, while there are individuals who've worked on these issues for decades, as Mark has just shared with us, I think 2007 was when things started ramping up on the Hill a little bit more. It was the year that the comprehensive national cybersecurity initiative was first rolled out, or I guess probably leaked at that time. And there were a lot of folks on the Hill that needed to get our hands around something that hadn't been given as much attention in the past. I think that things have, even though it's only been 3 years, I think things have changed, at least in terms of the Hill, fairly drastically. And I think it's worth going back and looking at sort of what has evolved during that time. When we first sort of got wind that there was this initiative that the Bush administration was going to roll out, and there were rumors and press reports about what that actually was, we had sort of tidbits of information coming in from the administration. They all came in when we were in a classified setting. We'd get bits and pieces, and those of us on committees of jurisdiction that were trying to pull this together sort of band together and started meeting to share briefings, share information, share perspectives, with the idea that I think that we knew there was going to be a lot of activity in this area, and probably a large legislative effort that would go across multiple committees. I think that over the last couple of years, that has benefited the process. I know we haven't, seen legislation pass, and sometimes folks get a little frustrated with the speed with which Congress acts. But from sort of an inside perspective, I think that actually a lot has gone on. I think in 2007, there were a few things that strike me as very different from today. Number one, the small number of congressional staff that were focused on this. When we would have these sort of inter-committee meetings, which came to be known as cyber jams, there would be maybe 4 or 5 of us in the room. Now, when there's someone of interest coming in, when Howard Schmidt came to speak with staff, for example, I think there were probably 40-plus people in the room. It's just a very different environment. I also think that there was, in terms of the public and in terms of member level, there was a lot of educating that needed to be done about exactly what was happening in terms of our networks, who had access to them, what could happen, what could we lose, what might we be losing right now. It's a lot easier to understand if someone breaks into your house. You see it, you see what they take. Someone could be in my computer right now and using it to attack others, and I wouldn't know. They could have access to all my information, I wouldn't know. They may have taken all my information, I wouldn't know. So it's a harder, I think it's a little bit harder of a learning curve. I think the other thing that was very challenging, and it's still a challenge, but it's gotten a lot better, is the highly classified nature of anything pertaining to cybersecurity coming out of the administration. I think there were those of us who were somewhat nervous to utter the word cybersecurity when we were outside of the SCIF. And I think a lot of folks pushed, but we pushed from the Hill quite a bit to get some information declassified. And it's not a perfect system right now, but I will say I can talk about the CNCI. I could talk about the 12 steps in the CNCI without getting in trouble today, which was not the case then. I can
mention again what that acronym stands for.
The Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, which was rolled out by the Bush administration. And so I think we have a ways to go in that area, but I think a lot of progress has been made. I also think that, from my perspective at least, it was very interesting to see the change in senior administration officials that were coming up to the Hill in 2008, folks that would come brief our committees a lot and 6 months earlier wouldn't have mentioned cybersecurity, and all of a sudden they were coming up and saying, this is what I need, this is the important issue, and it's sort of, to me, it's somewhat of a drastic change in a short amount of time. I'll say that today, in some ways, we find ourselves in a much different situation. Like I said, the classification issue has gotten somewhat better. I think we need to move along that path a little bit farther. And again, the number of staff educated in working on cybersecurity issues has grown significantly. And I think that there is a lot more interest and knowledge on a member level of these issues. You hear, at least with respect to members of committees of jurisdiction, talking about cybersecurity is not something you would normally hear in a member's talking points a couple of years ago. It's something that you see come up in a local, an interview with a local news affiliate in a member's district or state. It's just, I think, a very different dynamic, and folks will immediately say, this is something that's important. This is something we need to do something about. And there's a real commitment to take action. Obviously, the key question is what action should be taken. But I think that there's a big step there in acknowledging that this is a priority and Congress has a role and needs to show leadership. And this is, I think, evidenced by the large number of cybersecurity bills that are currently pending in both the House and the Senate. I often hear people count up the number of bills that are pending and maybe for a second say, isn't it great they're paying attention, and then sort of lament that this means that there's chaos and there isn't order. And are we going to have 10 different bills that all legislate in the same area? And I will say, while I understand that perspective, I will say that from my perspective on the inside, it is a good thing. There really is a strong unanimity amongst a lot of members that are senior on these committees that something needs to be done, which is and it's also a bipartisan issue. You don't really see partisan lines forming, at least at this point, which is somewhat unique in the climate today, and I think a really positive thing. I would also say that once you start dissecting these different bills, sometimes you have a House and a Senate bill. They're actually companions, so they are identical. And sometimes you have bills legislating in the same area a little differently, but the end goal ends up being fairly similar. And should a body move forward, I think that some of these differences are easily reconciled. And so I guess my message is I think a lot of this will get worked out as we go forward. On the Senate side, I would note that the majority leader has taken a strong interest in having a united effort in the Senate, recognizing that there is a lot of different committees that have jurisdiction over some piece of this issue, bringing us all together while we're working on bills to talk, discuss. I'll meet regularly with Senator Reid's staff to just update each other on where we are, how we're going to move forward. I personally haven't seen an organized effort like this so early in the process on another issue that I've handled. So I think that that's a positive thing. I think there are sort of three themes, very broad themes, that I hear across the Hill and that I think you see in most of the bills that have come out. One is that the federal government needs to be better organized to deal with these challenges and needs to provide more leadership to the nation. And part of that needs to take care of its own networks. There are weaknesses and challenges with how the federal government protects its own networks, and a lot of folks say, you can lead by example. And so I think that recognize that that's an area for improvement. Number two, that the market on its own will not provide an adequate level of security, that some level of government intervention is necessary. Now, there's a wide array of positions within that span in terms of what level of government intervention is necessary. But I think that even some of these, Mark mentioned the CSIS Commission. You have a lot of different groups that have come together that have private sector participation and have come out with recommendations that don't just say, leave us alone, we're okay, but actually in targeted ways, everyone agrees on some level that there is a need for government action here. And the third is sort of goes part and parcel with the second, which is the government really needs to partner with the private sector. Just as the markets aren't going to do this on their own, government can't just step in and take over. It doesn't work that way. The government doesn't own these networks. And figuring out what the right public-private partnership seems to be sort of the $1 million question. Everyone seems to agree it needs to happen, and figuring out how to do that is part of the challenge. I will briefly touch on currently within the Senate, within the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Senator Lieberman and our ranking member, Senator Collins, are working on and I can say finalizing a bill, working with Senator Carper as well, one of our subcommittee chairmen, that covers cybersecurity issues across the committee's jurisdiction. We have somewhat of a unique committee because we used to be governmental affairs, and in 2003 we picked up Homeland Security as well, and cybersecurity really falls into both of those parts of our jurisdiction. So with the Homeland Security piece being oversight of the Department of Homeland Security and their activities, and DHS has the lead on protecting both the civilian federal networks, but also helping protecting in the .com space. On the governmental affairs side of the committee, we have oversight of general federal government activities, federal IT, and the security of those networks, going along with that is the Federal Information Security Management Act, which passed earlier this decade in order to help protect the federal government networks. And so that reforming that legislation will be a piece of their effort. So I will highlight the areas in which this bill will touch on. I need to be somewhat broad since it is not rolled out, and that rollout will be left to the senators. So the following areas are the priority areas where we're working in this bill. First and foremost, especially for Senator Lieberman, is establishing in statute a White House office for cybersecurity and cyberspace policy. Right now, Howard Schmidt's office is a directorate of the National Security Staff, is not Senate confirmable, does not testify before Congress. And given the amount of work and policy decisions that are being made in that office, I think that there are a number of members on the Hill that think it's important both for oversight of the activities that are going on and also for transparency to the American public, that there be a relationship between the Hill and the senior person in the U.S. government that's organizing these efforts. The second piece is within the Department of Homeland Security, elevating and strengthening DHS's cybersecurity authorities, responsibilities, and resources across both their .gov responsibilities and .com. That breaks down into two pieces. One is what I mentioned earlier, which is the FISMA Reform, Federal Information Security Management Act. I think the criticism, I think that one thing that seems that almost everyone who works in cybersecurity issues in D.C. seems to agree upon is that FISMA needs to be reformed. Basically, the focus is taking a lot of the good pieces of the legislation and trying to do away with the bad pieces, which are essentially the criticisms that FISMA ends up being a paperwork exercise. It rewards agencies for submitting documents that say they're secure instead of actually taking the actions to make themselves more secure, and focusing more on performance and outcome. That is a piece of legislation that's already introduced in the Senate by Senator Carper and will be worked into this bill. The second piece with DHS's responsibilities is with respect to the private sector and specifically critical infrastructure. And when I say critical infrastructure, there are probably about 30 different definitions that people use when they talk about critical infrastructure. What we're really focusing here is what we were really focusing on here is the what I like to refer to, and this is in no way a technical definition, as the most critical infrastructure. We're not talking about every company that fits into one of the 18 sectors that's in the National Infrastructure Protection Plan that DHS interacts with and refers to as critical infrastructure. We're talking about taking a cut across the top of all sectors and looking at companies systems and assets that either can be disabled or taken down and will have catastrophic consequences if they are via a cyber attack, or pieces of our infrastructure that are important for the maintenance of our communications and the maintenance of our information infrastructure. The fifth piece is federal government procurement reform, essentially creating a system that requires and also enables acquisition officers in the federal government to have the knowledge that they need about the products that they're buying, risks that are out there, threats that are out there, vulnerabilities in the products, how they can be used, how they should be used. And we're really talking about creating a process where they're better informed. We're not talking about a government-wide blacklist of you can buy this or you can't buy that. But your average acquisition officer doesn't have the threat information that really should be informing some of these purchases. And last deals with the federal workforce. We have this growing problem, and we have all of these different agencies Some have more responsibilities than others. Some just have responsibility for protecting their own agency. But there's a real lack of having the numbers of the right qualified staff to tackle this problem. And so we're looking at assisting the recruitment and retention of federal employees in this area of specialized, skilled individuals, especially at the Department of Homeland Security. We're really going to be asking them to be building a new significant capability. So that's my broad outline of the legislation that we're working on. And I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Lieutenant Colonel Hare.
All right. Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for the Center for hosting us this evening. I appreciate the opportunity. Even though I'm not here providing necessarily an official DoD position, I do appreciate that without Mr. Schmidt here, I am the executive branch representative, and right next to me is a very astute reporter who I've been watching take copious notes. So I apologize if I do appear a little bit nervous, but luckily I did bring the standard Department of Defense crutch. I brought PowerPoint slides. I think we unilaterally, or by ourselves in the Department of Defense, we keep Microsoft alive and well. I'm sure what third world country we're helping through the Gates Foundation because of that, but there's probably goodness. So at least that's happening from all the PowerPoint that we've been consuming and producing in the Department of Defense, and you've probably had to read at some point, and I apologize for that. So I will be speaking a little bit about the cyber threat and national security from a military perspective. I say a military perspective because I'm kind of trying to generalize it, not necessarily, as I said, the Department of Defense, but from the perspective of the military. The subtitle there is important. The title of the slide is important. There does not have to be a war for there to be a significant threat in cyberspace. In fact, I'm sure that Mr. Schmidt would, as he said before, we are not in a cyber war, and so we don't look at it from that perspective, but we do appreciate that there are several significant threats that we do have to consider, both from states, state actors and non-state actors that would threaten us in several domains, to include in cyberspace. And I would like to make one comment before I jumped into it from what Mark has said, and that was the comment of we can build it, we can change it. That's true. That is a true statement. We did build it. That's true. And it is true that we can change it. However, we do not feel very optimistic that we will change it in the near future. So with that in mind, we do have to consider the landscape as it is today. So what I'll talk about, I think I got my own clicker here. Which one? Up, down? Right, left, stop, nope.
I don't think so. Want to sit over here and use this? Or?
I can do that. Or if you wouldn't mind, if you just hit the space bar for me, or the.
Nope.
Okay, since it's a PDF, it may require something a little bit more finesse than.
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Now we're good. Yeah. Your little thing should work now.
Okay, it's working now.
Just
Super.
tell me when to press, and I will continue.
Okay, it's working now.
Right.
We're good. So first, I'll talk a little bit about cyberspace as a domain, and I think I might answer one of the questions that Marcus posed there. Differing perspectives on the issues as related to cyberspace and cybersecurity, then specifically national security in cyberspace and the role of military and potentially role of a legislature from a military perspective. So first of all, cyberspace as a domain, as somewhere. This is actually a definition that is codified in Homeland Security Presidential Directives and National Security Presidential Directive 54. And I think starting with this definition makes a very important point very clear. Cyberspace is more than what's commonly referred to as the Internet. Telecommunications networks, control systems, embedded processors and controllers and critical infrastructure. So I think that answers right there potentially one question. We look at cyberspace, or we as the federal government look at cyberspace as an important place where we communicate. There's your answer. What is it? It's a place where we communicate. So it has now become very important for economic reasons, for several reasons, and because of that, it has become important as some place that needs to be defended and secured from a national security perspective. So the Department of Defense has no intent necessarily to militarize cyberspace. There's no intent for that. But we do appreciate that we rely on cyberspace significantly for our operations. The nation relies on cyberspace, and we do have to be very serious about what is occurring in that domain. So as it says right there, as it talks about in that definition, it's no longer possible to separate out packet and circuit switch networks, for example. You can't separate out this part over here and say that's cyberspace and that part's not. It is all converged and potentially even kind of switch places, if you'll consider for the phone and the TV, for example. They kind of switch places if you think about it. Now we have the TV is connected to the wall, our cable, fiber to the wall, so we can get all these channels. You don't think about having to be mobile with a TV, but it used to be you could be mobile because you're using the satellite antenna. Your phone is the opposite. Your phone is now you can take anywhere you want. If you think about it, that's the thing you want to be able to take where you want. You didn't want to just have to go to the phone in the hall. So now they've not really converged as much as they've actually switched places. So you can't look at these things as differently. And the backbones are mostly the same. If we're not necessarily always electronically connected, or I'm sorry, not necessarily logically connected, we are electronically connected. So from a child's laptop in China to a remote terminal unit on a control system and critical infrastructure, you name it. I don't know how many we have today, but we have many of them. And as a result, we do have to consider the impact of everything that occurs in the domain. And so we do have to look at it from a national security perspective. The trons will make it through. Now, for the military, the concept of domain is important because the domain is one where we operate, and it's in those domains or those places where we defend the nation. So we understanding it a place where things are occurring. It's not necessarily a collection of technologies. That helps us understand what our potential roles could be as regards to cyberspace. And the last thing then to focus on here is, as far as the definition is concerned, is cyberspace is not the information or the data, but it is the place where both of those are stored, modified, exchanged, and processed. So what this means is the concepts of the information and the networks itself, those are interwoven issues that we have to contend with both in many different forums. And it provides the perspectives that the different agencies, at least that I deal with, entertain, or that they come to discussions on cyberspace that influence how they come to discussions on cyberspace. So let's look at some of these different perspectives that we should consider here. So for an agency that's concerned about foreign affairs, they are mostly concerned about the information that's occurring or that's being transmitted and processed and stored and provided in cyberspace. So in a nation like ours, we're very concerned about the freedom of information, expression of ideas. Cyberspace is a wonderful place to broaden those freedom of expression, broaden ideas, promotion of ideology. These type of things are important regarding the information in cyberspace. Another agency that might be more concerned about public safety, they're going to focus primarily on the networks, availability of the networks, security of critical infrastructure, so availability of cyberspace in order to conduct the things in order to operate the critical infrastructure. An energy department would be also concerned about the resilience of generation and safety of nuclear power facilities, things like that. Uses of the domain, the network itself. National intelligence, we talked about the idea of espionage. Espionage is not new. But cyberspace facilitates greater access to information at lower risk. You no longer have to send the spy over there to take a picture of the document. Now perhaps you can get to it from the safety of your own location, so it increases the incentive to keep trying to get those documents or that information wherever it may be. And so from their perspective, the network is certainly important as long as it's available, but they're more concerned about the information flow within the domain. Law enforcement, again, usually concerned about information flow. Financial safety, safety of financial transactions, security of identity, security of commerce, things like this. And then finally, the defense, a defense agency, a military, is actually going to be concerned with both. Not only the availability of the infrastructure for our use, to be able to communicate, to be able to reach back. If you want to send a fighting force forward to defend the national interests, you don't want to send more than necessary there because it creates another security risk, a physical security risk. You want to rely on reach back. You want to be able to command and control in a very timely fashion from the continental United States, for example. So we're very interested in the availability of the infrastructure, but also availability of infrastructure for energy, other critical infrastructure within here in the United States. In addition, we're very concerned about cyber espionage as well, the security of information related to weapons technology. We're very concerned that's safeguarded. Here we're concerned now about the information, not necessarily the networks. And then lastly, countering the adversary's use of cyberspace. There is not just hostile ideology, but hostile communications that go on in cyberspace, directions on how to make all sorts of horrible things that put our soldiers and airmen and our military at risk in cyberspace, so we're concerned about that, and other ways that the adversaries may hold all of our activities, our national activities at risk in cyberspace. So several different perspectives or issues that we're concerned about in the domain. So which of these issues on the previous slide are rightly issues to be securitized? When I say securitized in the way that academics like Barry Buzan would securitize something, as he defines it, when an issue is presented as posing an existential threat, usually to the entire nation state, such that it requires emergency measures, those that go beyond normal political actions, now it's being securitized. And, I would don't want to try to compare myself to Graham Allison, but I think his perspective that he employed in a recent study he did for national security is important. He said there are a lot of things out there that are happening, a lot of things in the previous slide that me as a consumer or as a taxpayer or as a citizen would be concerned about, but I wouldn't necessarily categorize all those as meeting those thresholds as I just described as being existential threats to national security. And a security issue then would be potentially one that's been successfully securitized, successfully raised or made that measure, raised to such an issue that it successfully gets to Congress and Congress employs measures. It has to change the political system, or some type of other measure might have to be employed to combat the threat. And then, I'd also raise Andre Wolfers here because national security itself is an ambiguous symbol, and that's one of the reasons that we're here, why we have so many discussions about cybersecurity. What is it? What is the threshold of this? What's the threshold of that? It's very ambiguous. I appreciate that, but I think it's important to clarify what we really consider as a national security issue and what may not raise to that level. And I think really the issue then becomes, from national security perspective, that those issues are political or policy measures or political decisions, not technological and not legal. We often try to look at things as being a technological solution or a technological problem that not necessarily is the case, or a legal issue. If we can't find a way to, a simple way to develop policy, we often look to the legal decisions, say, oh, well, the legal norm is right here, so that's obviously a simple solution. That's never been the case in my experience so far, that there's any simple legal solutions to any of the issues of national security in cyberspace. So, with that in mind, I would suggest that you have basically two different issues from that previous slide that would fall into the realm of national security issue. First, attacks and intrusions to conduct espionage against information systems containing information of a national security value. So not necessarily any type of cyber espionage, but certainly those against national security systems. This would include, for example, government and weapons systems. But it wouldn't include, for example, necessarily identity theft or other related cybercrimes. And then also attacks and intrusions on critical infrastructure systems that would pose a direct existential threat to the United States. Energy, transportation, clearly. Telecommunications infrastructure itself, clearly. But maybe not those attacks that would occur against some other system that would adequately surmount it in sufficient time. So let me be clear here. Again, although I'm not making an official statement here, I do want to be clear that I'm not saying that those things are not important cybersecurity issues. What I'm talking about is a prioritization from a national security perspective, the highest priority being the two here. So from a public policy perspective, being Marcus and I are both students of public policy, so we want to frame it from the idea of a public good or from what would be our goal here from a national security perspective. This would be a way to look at it. The public good then being the state of being in which the populace, all of us, governing institutions and critical infrastructure, are not threatened by those two types of attacks and intrusions. So now what I've done is kind of frame it into, okay, this is a goal. What should be done about it from the perspective of the military? And as Don had asked, so what do we think as far as from a legislator perspective? And I would say we, I'm saying in this case very much me, because again, this is not an official DoD perspective on a legislature or any legislator. From that standpoint, it's from a military perspective of a legislature. So first of all, a role of a military. Well, as you can appreciate, then, we're challenged to work closely with other government agencies. We have to balance, and I don't think insurmountably challenged. I mean, I think we get into some very good discussions, but we have to balance those issues that all the agencies feel are important as relates to cyberspace. For example, freedom of expression versus countering propaganda. We have to be careful that we're not doing something that's, countering an adversary use that is directly harmful or direct threat to our troops in the field, for example, or to any military in the field, and we don't want to be perceived as being somehow impinging upon freedom of expression. Collecting intelligence versus denying communications. That is an age-old intelligence versus operations discussion. Well before the common, cyberspace became the common vernacular, back when it was just wireless radio on the open seas. Do you want to jam that signal so that the enemy admiral can't communicate with the fleet, or do you want to collect the intelligence and find out where they're going? Every scenario we have to look at very closely to figure out which is the best course of action to be taking. Very complicated issue. Lastly, supporting private action versus countering perceptions of distrust. I should have put perceptions of distrust there. Oh, I should first of all get to the next slide. Perceptions of distrust. We want to be supportive of the Department of Homeland Security. We do have technical expertise within the Department of Defense that we can lend to a lot of the missions that they have. We want to be supportive of the of several different organizations, both private and public, that are furthering cybersecurity in the nation. But we also have to be cognizant of the concerns that private industry may have with government involvement in their activities. We want to make sure that we're not creating, in our attempts to improve the cybersecurity of the nation, we're not creating potentially atmosphere of distrust. And we also have to change our way of thinking, looking at how we consider critical vulnerabilities in cyberspace, how we look at operations maneuvering within cyberspace as well for our own purposes, and to counter adversaries who are very, very agile in their operations in not just cyber espionage, but attacking critical infrastructure and all sorts of things. And then prioritizing what we consider critical operations, because we have very limited resources for how we can defend our operations in cyberspace, and also supporting other agencies with their efforts. There's lots of things that we can do, or that a military can do from that perspective to help both the rest of the federal, the executive branch, but also congressional activities. And so lastly, I'll look a bit at the role of a legislature. And I think these are, I'm assuming it's all pretty much head nods. You've seen all of this before. Promoting public-private partnership to build trust. That's obviously a key goal that's talked about very frequently, but it's important from our perspective too, because we do recognize that we do rely very heavily on the private sector for our ability to use cyberspace to communicate. We rely very heavily, and so that is a very important goal for us as well. Fostering private sector contribution to cybersecurity. We are not in a position to, we may depend heavily on Verizon, but we are not in a position to defend Verizon in cyberspace. That is, obviously, they're much more prepared for that. They're much more better postured for that, and they will see what has to be done much sooner than we will. That said, though, we are very dependent on their activity to secure themselves. And we are keenly aware of our dependence on the private sector. Also, we have to be aware of, and the legislature needs to be concerned about the natural tensions that exist between government agencies and not exacerbating those. Not perhaps putting one agency advantage or playing off another agency with the other when they're looking at further increasing security here. I don't think that's an issue, but that's something to be concerned about. Focusing on probable scenarios. There are many scenarios out there of doomsday scenarios that could be occurring, and I would just ask that we are very careful about that. Of course, the potentially not the most plausible, but some very interesting scenarios are a good way to get attention, or a good way to achieve your goals of securitizing an issue. But it's very important that that we do take serious issues seriously, and we focus on those that are most probable. And there are a lot of expertise out there, and I've seen the hearings. I mean, and I do know that Congress does take that very seriously, and they do bring the experts in. It's important that those are the experts that we rely on for what are the more probable scenarios that we need to focus on for legislative activity. As Mark Fabro from Lofty Perch, he stated in recent testimony, Often and erroneously, the cybersecurity problem is framed under the assumption that there's a simple and single uniform grid, for example, talking about the electrical sector. And that the mitigation strategy should be applicable to all areas, and that is certainly not the case. Even the electric grid is a very complex infrastructure, and so one particular attack that may hold one plant somewhere at risk may or may not propagate throughout the network, but we have to look at it very carefully. And then avoiding imprecise regulations that lead to perverse incentive systems. You talked about that very well as far as, FISMA, an example of spending more time with compliance. Every hour that you spend making your paperwork in order is an hour that is not being spent on cybersecurity. So to be very cognizant about that. And then lastly, providing rapid support to those who must implement whatever emergency measures. And that may be the Department of Defense, it may be the Department of Homeland Security, it may be Department of State, perhaps, in engaging with friends and allies. But it's important that the rapid support is provided to whoever the lead agency is, because the issues are so complicated, so dynamic, and things happen so quickly that we can't afford to take a very long time to respond, because it'll quickly be overcome by events. So I believe on that. That means it's at the end, because it's actually not a PowerPoint. But that's all I have to speak on that topic. But I'll gladly entertain questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Ellen?
Thank you. I should start by saying I actually signed up to attend this thinking I would come to hear Howard Schmidt. So thank you, Don, for the bait and switch. But I
thank him.
I thought I would start by talking a little bit about how I came to cover cyber and cybersecurity. I'm the newcomer to the issue on this panel here. Mark's been doing this for decades, and Deborah's been doing it for a number of years. I actually first came to it through a previous beat, which was privacy, or covering privacy issues that arose through modern technology and the need for security. So whether that was DNA databases or biometrics or the latest Facebook outrage, those were the sorts of issues I was looking at. And Deborah mentioned the Bush administration's big cyber initiative, the CNCI, Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. Toward the end of the administration, I learned that President Bush had issued a secret directive that called for intelligence agencies, in particular the National Security Agency, or NSA, to play a significant role in helping to safeguard civilian government computer networks. And from the privacy perspective, anytime NSA is mentioned, antenna go up, alarm bells ring. What exactly is NSA's role in helping to secure the networks? What sort of access to data would they have? Would there be purely private communications? Who would oversee this? So I started to get interested in the issue. Then we had a change of administrations. I changed beats, now a national security reporter, focusing on surveillance and cyber. So I'm looking at cyber through a more broadly speaking national security lens. Privacy is still an element of that, but it's no longer the driving theme to my coverage. As I began to delve into cyber warfare, cybersecurity, I gradually came to see, at least to my way of thinking, that there are two sort of fundamental issues underlying cyber. One is uncertainty, the uncertainty of the cyber threat, of who's behind a particular operation, what is really their true intent, what is the response of the network going to be, and then secrecy, whether it's the government's need for secrecy or penchant for secrecy. Uncertainty and secrecy, the way I see it, pose some challenges for policymakers making policy or selling their policy, as well as for reporters covering the issue. So what do I mean by that? Well, I'll start first with some policy issues. a few months ago, I wrote a story about the difficulties in coming up with rules of the road for cyber warfare, some of which Forrest touched on, and given that we have such uncertainty and also in this case competing agendas. So I used as a case study to illustrate this an incident that had previously not been disclosed involving the CIA assisting the Saudis in setting up a honeypot or online forum, website of sorts, aimed at luring militants, Saudi militants, to the website to make it their own, to use it as a forum for communications. The idea was that it would help the Saudi government track their movements better, locate them, round them up, put them in jail, maybe even rehabilitate them. It's evidently worked well, I'm told, although the government did not round up every single militant, and a few were getting out of the country and using the site, so I was told, as a means of coordinating their movements to send suicide bombers into Iraq and ending up killing U.S. troops. Well, this was becoming a problem, so much so that senior U.S. military officials, up to including General Odierno in Iraq, wanted this site taken down. Let's stop the pipeline, and requested that the site be dismantled. So you had the CIA helping them set up the site. Now DoD was asking, its expert cyber technicians to dismantle it. There was a bit of an interagency debate beforehand. They finally agreed, we're going to do it, save lives, and this network operating group dismantled the website. Now, they're supposedly some of the best at doing this, but not even they could foresee all of the consequences, unintended consequences. So not only did they take out the website, they also dismantled more than 300 servers in Saudi, Germany, and Texas, which was not something we anticipated. So that led to a bit of an after-action debate, let's say. Even though some lower-level Saudi officials had been apprised of this operation, key princes apparently were furious at the loss of a very important intelligence-gathering tool. And when they were upset, the CIA, their sponsors, also got a little upset. How could you let this happen? Well, and then the Germans were also a little perturbed at the servers being shut down. All of this is to say that there was and continues to be lively debate around the issues of should DoD have the authority to disrupt or dismantle militant websites outside the traditional battlefield, outside the theater of war? Would this be considered a traditional military activity? Or is it by its very nature covert action, which traditionally has been the province of the CIA and would require presidential finding, timely notification to the intelligence committees on the Hill? The Bush administration wrestled with that, and in fact, the CIA asked the Justice Department lawyers to come up with a determination. It was such a tricky issue, they basically sat on and punted to the Obama administration, which is still, my understanding is, working through this, what is sometimes referred to as Title 10 versus Title 50 debate. Now, the issue is further complicated because it involves equities across not only agencies like DoD, NSA, and CIA, but competing equities on the Hill between House and Senate Armed Services Committees and the House Senate Intelligence Committees, perhaps even Homeland Security, I'm not sure. We can talk about this more. I'd be happy to love to engage in this. Forrest? Uncertainty about the threat raises another major issue, which has been discussed by my panelists, co-panelists, which is how DoD and the NSA should and will assist DHS in protecting private industry. Because if we assume at some point our adversaries are going to make the attempt to get into our critical infrastructure, whether they be banking systems, power plants, or aviation, whether it be taking out something or altering information so that it undermines trust in, our financial information, then who is going to take the lead in responding, and under what rules or authorities? And how will the Pentagon's new Cyber Command, which is being stood up as we speak at Fort Meade, how will it work with DHS in protecting private industry? Now, uncertainty about the threat means to me that we also don't know, as I think has been alluded to by Deborah and Forrest, whether we should place more rules on industry or trust them to protect themselves. We've said that we really can't. Well, industry would say, yes, we can, and I think are still a little, nervous about the degree to which there might be new rules coming from the administration. But others say, on the other hand, it's time for a sort of a seatbelt law for cybersecurity. We've gone too long without that. Think about it. Even Google, which is sort of a uber tech firm that prides itself too on this, tries to perpetuate a reputation of being very protective of its consumers' personal data against government prying. Even Google went to NSA for help after this latest big espionage attack on its networks. And that I thought was significant, both in terms of the fact that Google came forward and said we'd been hacked, and then also basically pointed the finger at China, and then that it would, go to the NSA for help. But that kind of relationship makes people uneasy. What exactly is NSA doing? What sorts of data are they sharing with Google? What sort of access are they getting to Google's data, if anything? So much of what we want to know is classified or secret that it's hard to know what the government, in some cases, is really doing and whether we should trust them. And excessive secrecy, I posit, is a problem both for policymakers and for reporters and for the public. I have spoken to former Bush administration officials, security officials, who have said they think that overclassification has been one of the problems in pushing a strong cyber program and cyber policy. So that's something we might also want to talk about. Which leads me also to the coverage issue. The Washington Post is a newspaper for general readers. That includes policymakers, as well as soccer moms and soccer dads outside the Beltway. Now, there are a core of readers who are interested, care about Title 10 versus Title 50, or who the cyber czar is and what his program is. But for the vast majority of our readers, I think they start to pay attention when they hear Google's been attacked by China. That's something they can grasp. So that's also a challenge I face as a journalist. I also face some internal challenges, that is from editors, because the uncertainty about the seriousness of the threat leads to skepticism. After all, we still have not seen the equivalent of the cyber Pearl Harbor or cyber 9/11. There are no dead bodies in the street, at least not yet. So what's the fuss about, right? Some people even say, is the threat hyped? Well, as a reporter and avowed non-techie, I rely on experts such as my fellow panelists here to help me assess the seriousness of the threat. And again, classified. There's a lot of classified reports and reporting out there that would speak to it, but if it's classified, it can't be divulged, and that makes that means the public won't know exactly what the threat is. And I say that undermines any effort by the government or any set of lawmakers to help sell needs for changes in authorities, or a program that needs big funding. Let's say you want to create a program that includes some form of monitoring of the networks, or identity authentication schemes. Any of those are going to create civil liberties and privacy concerns. And I guess I've come full circle now to where I started. So with that, I'll stop, and we'll take questions.
Okay. Let's, before we open the floor to questions from the audience, I want to give the other panelists a chance to follow up with any comments they might have as to what's been said by the others. Go ahead.
Thanks, Don. I'll start just briefly, because that is good. A couple of thoughts have come up. Forrest pointed out that there's different ways of looking at cyberspace. One of the things I like to always emphasize when I talk to fellow techie types, cyberspace, internet, anything around that tends to the discussion revolves around the wires and the switches and the electronics and things that actually make up the networks. And truly, the classic view of the internet cyberspace is that of the components that go into it. But if you step out on the sidewalk and you ask the public, what is the internet, what is cyberspace, the answer usually is given in the context of the content. So it's all about Google, Facebook, Twitter, email, telephones, things along those lines, very content-oriented discussion. So as policy types, often we confuse these, and we really need to separate out, are we talking about the conduit of cyberspace, the wires and switches, or the content of cyberspace, the essence of what's inside of it as humans are communicating with each other? And they really are two separate things. There's a lot of resiliency in the conduit side. There's not a lot of resiliency in the content side. This is why we're having problems with identity theft and phishing and things like that. That's not really a wires and switches type of problem. So that's an area that we really need to focus in on. And I had one other one, and I can't remember what it was, so I'll pass it over to Deborah.
Any follow-up? Yeah? No?
I actually have 3 points, if I may. First, I'd like to kind of clarify the concept or the issue about focusing on probable scenarios. That is not to say that there are not very real threats out there. That is just the point I'm just trying to make is we need to focus on the most likely, the most realistic. I mean, we face threats from over foreign intelligence, over 100 foreign intelligence services every day trying to get into critical national security networks. There are real threats. What we need to do is we need to focus on those type of threats from national security perspective, because otherwise we end up risking diluting the agenda too much. Secondly, competing agendas. I want to be clear that, and hopefully I made that clear when I was talking about differing perspectives on cyber issues. They are not competing agendas from my perspective. We all have the same agenda, all of the executive branch, and hopefully the legislative branch, and hopefully every citizen has the same agenda of improving national security. It's just the method and means and the authorities and the roles that we do to execute that, all complementary agendas. Sometimes we have to reconcile and we have to coordinate better than we do. And lastly, I'm certainly not at liberty to talk about any current operations or recent operations the Department of Defense is undertaking. But I will stress is that just as General McChrystal is stressing very much in improving our precision and our accuracy and being very very precise about all of our operations in Afghanistan, we would follow that same level of precision. We would expect to follow that same level of precision with any operations that the military does. And I'll just leave that at that.
One thing that you all might be able to help me on, and that is a recent survey of 200 top IT professionals that work in the area of defense and national security. 74% thought there would be a major cyber attack on the U.S. by a foreign government by the end of this year. Does anybody know anything about that? I mean, why would they? I mean, you mentioned every day you get people trying to get information from the various systems here. Is there anything peculiar about that particular perception, or?
Marcus, they come after you, so what do you
I
think?
don't mind, yeah. So the question then I would pose back to the survey takers is, what is an attack?
Yeah.
You know, the DoD and others report millions of attacks per day. Okay, what is millions what? You know, we do the same thing in the private sector. The various security companies, millions of attacks per day. So is this email coming in with an attachment? Is that an attack? Is it, you know, a deliberate break-in? Is that an attack? Is it a ping? So I would go back to the survey asker and, you know, define what you mean by attack, and even those who are answering the question, what's the frame here? Because we're constantly under attack. So the odds of one happening, in fact, it's happening as we speak. So of course we're going to have something this year.
And I think a lot of people say that foreign governments are unlikely to try and take down other systems just because everybody is so interdependent. I mean, if we go down, I mean, we're going to take a lot of the world economy with us, and that's going to ruin any, you know, foreign government that's got any stake in the economy.
Well, in fact, that is a very driving factor now that's changed a lot of the equation in the last 5 or 6 years, is this high dependence of all countries on cyberspace for economic prosperity. Okay. And particularly because globally, we're globalized, the markets are all very interlinked, the spy systems are all interlinked. The fabric underneath that cyberspace literally cannot be disturbed if you want global economy to live. So there's kind of like this life force that's keeping that going. And we can see that in the types of attacks. They're generally not against the communications infrastructure. They're against the stuff that's in cyberspace or that are depending on cyberspace, but not cyberspace itself, which is a definite change in what we thought the threats would be a good 10 years ago or so.
Deborah, I have one brief question for you. You mentioned the legislation that Chairman Lieberman is working on with Ms. Collins, I believe, to give the cybersecurity coordinator in the White House a status that would be subject to confirmation by the Senate and therefore could be called before the Congress to answer questions. I saw 2 different reports within the same week, last November I believe it was, where one said Mrs. Collins thought it would be a mistake to have that person in the White House, that they should be at the Homeland Security Department where they already have that line responsibility, as I understand it, and yet it seems like we're doing a reverse if we want that person to be in the White House from why we ended up with the Homeland Security Department in the first place. We had a coordinator for Homeland Security in the White House, and Mr. Lieberman, to his credit, pressed that we need a department that has the resources and the capabilities and so on. What's going on with this organization of the cybersecurity system?
All right. Well, I'll start out by saying I'm not going to presume to comment or comment on behalf of Senator Collins. But I would say that first of all, when you're talking about cybersecurity, you're not just talking about Homeland Security. And so when you're talking about a coordinator in the White House, you're talking about coordinating offense and defense and intelligence and law enforcement. There are a lot of different areas that really are not within the purview of the Department of Homeland Security. And I think, secondly, Senator Lieberman believes in strengthening this role in the White House, but also strengthening DHS's role for what DHS is responsible for. The agencies are where the operational activities take place. We're certainly not suggesting that the White House office should be operational. The issue is really coordinating all the different activities that are going on, making sure that there are certain national goals that all the different agencies' activities are mapping to, and that certain issues that involve a number of different agencies that need to be adjudicated, policy that needs to be developed, that there is a critical eye that's bringing that to the president's eye, and that's prioritizing those issues.
Marcus, do you think the White House cybersecurity coordinator should be subject to Senate confirmation and testify before the Congress?
Yeah, I sure do. In fact, the role of that individual is to coordinate across all the departments and agencies, set the tone for what they should do, and testifying before the House or the Senate is absolutely appropriate.
Okay. Well, let's open things up to our audience. We have plenty of time here. Raise your hand and wait for a microphone, and then identify yourself and your affiliation. Let's start over here if we could.
Hugh McElrath, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Several of the panelists have alluded to this. I wanted to kind of pull the string on this idea of existential cyber threat. I think about existential threats. Well, nuclear weapons, at one time communism. If someone took away the ability to broadcast Monday Night Football, it would definitely be a cause of war, but not necessarily an existential threat. And as Mark Sachs said, we used to say when we were doing intelligence estimates of a serious infrastructure attack, that something that could take us down and hold us down for a long period of time. I mean, we can survive shutting down the stock market when there's a heavy snowfall, and that's inconvenient, but it's not an existential threat. But somebody could take us down and hold us down, and we're starting to think somebody like the Chinese could do it, but what's their motivation to take out their principal debtor? So I think what we're really worried about is somebody that doesn't have a stake in the national system, i.e. a terrorist, somebody that has a stake in taking it down. And what do we think about the ability of somebody like that to plan, do all the intelligence preparation, and to maintain a campaign over an extended period of time in spite of all our attempts to stand our systems back up?
You touched a bit on that, Marcus, in your remarks, and you sort of downplayed the possibility that terrorists would do so just because their networks are dependent on cyberspace. Would you or anyone else like to elaborate further on that?
I'm sure the others would like to also, and I'll still hold to that a terrorist group, and we're talking the ones that are fairly well known, not the lone wolves who may do something completely wacky. Cyberspace is as important to them as it is to us. But the thing we have to take a deep breath on, you mentioned financial services, the stock market, for example. The big crash that we had last week, for a period of several minutes, stock market drops 1,000 points, bounces right back up. Most are in somewhat of agreement it's a computer problem that caused that, some type of computerized trading. Our adversaries look at that, with a stroking of the chin, saying, there's a weakness there. There's a possibility. If I want to do something damaging, how can I repeat that? Could I repeat it deliberately versus an accident? You look at what's happening in the Gulf with the BP thing, highly computerized. In fact, it was awarded as like one of the safest oil derricks out there, but yet it fails. How did that happen? Is there something I can do to influence this again? Our adversaries absolutely are paying attention to these either natural or human mistake types of things that are connected to cyberspace, chalking up the lessons, wondering, is that something I can learn from? Can I duplicate it? Can I use it against us? Getting inside their head, knowing whether they'll actually do it, I'll leave that up to Defense Department, intelligence agencies, and others to figure out. My job is to keep the networks up and running. What they do through the networks, that's a threat problem that trying to understand the threat, and even law enforcement has a role here. What is the next crime going to be? What's the next criminal group going to do? That's a huge question. That's trying to get into the human mind and predicting what a threat group or threat person might do next. But we can certainly see, and it's very unnerving, the types of things that could happen because of the highly complex world that we live in, highly interdependent world.
Forrest, you said you've heard a number of scenarios spun. Which is the most probable, or where's the real danger?
Well, I'd probably have to think if I was going to rank order them. But I would say that, from our perspective, if you consider a nation state, very technically able nation state, could potentially take down power to some portion of the country. If there was no conflict or something going on, you probably have to kind of question why they would do that, because right away they would be divulging their capability. They would maybe making us upset and maybe risking some lives, potentially risking some lives, but what benefit would they gain from it? But if we were potentially looking at, there was a conflict that we might be getting involved in with this nation state, or we were involved in this nation state, now we would expect them to try to hold us, to try to stop our ability to respond any way they could. So we clearly expect the nation's critical infrastructure to be at risk in the event of any contingency that we would be involved in. Anybody who could probably would. So we expect it, specifically. So in connection with a conflict, now they have a very good incentive for doing something because it's directly supporting some conflict somewhere that they can get an immediate gain from. So the kind of one-off, criminal masterminds shutting down the network someplace and taking out, entire half the nation, you really kind of have to drill down and say, why would they do that? But I don't think you don't have to drill down very far at all to say, okay, if we're in a conflict with another nation state or maybe potentially a non-state actor, where they recognize our dependence on the U.S. critical infrastructure, not just the telecommunications, but the entire electric power, whatever, that we would fully expect them to try to hold the infrastructure at risk.
Okay. Anybody else on that question? All right. Other questions from the audience? Gentleman back there, right behind you, Richard.
Henry Hedger, researcher now. I wondered how long can we possibly tolerate these militant websites that were mentioned as a serious threat to our nation generally, let alone militarily and whatnot. But look what has happened in the last 6 months. Fort Hood and now Times Square, militant websites are involved. How long will it take Congress to look into this before they can act to do something to either dismantle or destroy them?
What do you think, Congress, we should do about this?
Well, I'm no expert on the laws, but my understanding is we in the United States would face some difficulty in trying to pass legislation allowing this because of First Amendment concerns, First Amendment issues. I think that's a big hurdle, and at the same time, there's also, when I said competing agendas, I should have said maybe competing equities or interests. The intelligence agencies, see these websites as a means of gathering valuable intelligence. Whereas, you're a military officer and you see the website as actually maybe recruiting, indoctrinating, and moving militants, you see it more as a threat, to your soldiers. So in that sense, you do have some competing interests or equities. But Forrest, you might want to elaborate a little bit more.
Well, what would the intelligence agency do with that intelligence? Hopefully it would be trying to help plans to actually stop that activity some way. So again, I wouldn't consider it conflicting. We just have to coordinate those operations effectively so that we're doing the right thing at the right time.
And also, once you take out a website, it's not to say that the site has not been mirrored somewhere else, in 50 other different countries. And so, you can take out à la classe, and then it pops up again somewhere else under a different name. And I think that's another one of the difficulties of trying to contest this space and just kill websites. I don't know that that's really going to be too effective in the long run. Let
me add to that real quick. Most of the websites and the communication that the terrorist group use are not the ones that you and I can go to. They maintain their own private network, and so the few that are public, they're not really the real ones, if that makes sense to you. The real ones are not visible. Even on the underground side of criminal behavior, most of the sites where the criminals exchange information, sell cards, do all that type of work is not visible to you and me. It's working it's in cyberspace. It's certainly reachable by your machine, but you don't know how to get there. They do. They build these virtual worlds on top of the infrastructure that we're using. They coexist with us. It's no different than you walk out on the street. You may see two gentlemen talking to each other. They may be engaged in a felonious crime. You don't know that. They just appear to be two gentlemen talking to each other, but they may be planning an overthrow of the government or exchanging drugs or who knows. Cyberspace works the same way. They will operate directly under our noses, and we have no idea that they're there. One of the very interesting case, and this was briefed by the FBI last year, is they set up they got one of their agents to appear to many of the foreign underground criminal groups to appear to be one of them, was able to infiltrate, become a member of the organized crime groups, had gotten so good at it that the FBI themselves had even labeled him as one of their top 10 most wanted because he was so good at portraying himself. And there was a lot of deconfliction that they had to do inside. He ultimately portrayed himself as understanding a lot about technology, ultimately was able to gain access to their websites, ultimately began to run them as the system administrator, a huge treasure trove of information that could be used by the Bureau for prosecuting these cases. And ultimately, in the end, he made it appear to the others, the other criminals in there, that he himself was about to be raided by the FBI, that they were banging down the door, I got to shut all this stuff down, perfect cover for making this thing go away, this virtual world that they had existed. So there's a lot of opportunity for counter-crime, counter-espionage, things like that. But there's also a lot of opportunity for others that have been outside of the federal government, outside of any of that counter work, to do the same thing. In fact, there's a great case of a grandmother out in the Midwest who had set up fake terrorist websites. So this is 5 or 6 years old now. Learned to speak Arabic, lured in several terrorists, learned a lot about them, and she was staying undercover until they had some arrests. They had to have her come in to testify, and that's when her cover was blown. She's written books about the experience. So this is a very, very strange world of individuals that are involved in it, governments that are involved in it, as well as underground groups by themselves. So it's, as Forrest had said earlier, it's not one size fits all. Even though you may not be able to say that everything is the same, it's not. It's very different as you look at it from different directions.
Okay. Other questions? Thought I saw a hand over here.
I'm Ross Johnson, Wilson Center. Marcus, a question primarily for you, probably. You described how what was billed as a reliable network, trusting the people on the edges, and creating a network that with packets that could survive atomic attack, disruption, all that kind of thing, to what we have today. And you said, we built it, we could change it. Could you give a couple of sort of thoughts or suggestions how it could be changed to take into account these new problems if we wanted to and we had the the will to do it? And perhaps a related question, it goes to the critical infrastructure, the power industry. I mean, why should that be accessible to anybody except those inside? Now, you can always have an inside, plant agent, whatever. But isn't that the kind of an issue that could be relatively easily solved?
So you're answering part of the question just by your second question. We have a thing now in America known as the smart grid that we're starting to roll out. Smart grid. Okay, so the smart grid in its final form will look very much like the internet. It's highly connected, most every home, business, everything's all part of this. One option is to make it just part of the public internet. In other words, all the information that flows from the smart meters through the power grid back to the power companies just uses the internet as transport. Another option is to create a completely separate network. There's opportunity here. Certainly it's a little more expensive, but 40 years of lessons learned about interneting could be applied to the smart grid. In other words, if you're going to build something new, build it with all the lessons learned built into it. And then what you learn from the smart grid, you might be able to pull back to the internet to increase its resiliency. If healthcare IT takes off and we start doing in-home healthcare monitoring, things like that, if the broadband plan takes off like the FCC wants it to, there's lots of opportunities to learn how to take 40 years of lessons and build them into these new networks. So we're not suggesting rebuild the internet. It's more of new networks that we're building, build them based on those 40 years of experience. Don't build it as an exact copy of what we already have. In other words, don't repeat the mistakes. And as we learn from those networks, apply them back to the public networks. It's kind of an iterative process. I just don't see that vision happening. What I see more of is let's just build more of what we have. And security is this last thing that we apply at the end as kind of a checklist versus an idea that's part of it from the start that says take all these lessons learned and build them into new networks.
Okay. Flip Strum in the back there first, and then we'll get this gentleman.
Hi, Philippa Strum from the Wilson Center. It seems to me, and I apologize if this is very naive because I'm fairly new and not at all a techie, fairly new to this subject, not at all a techie. It seems to me you're talking about the need for two different kinds of policies, and I wonder if you would comment on this. On the one hand, we've got the threat of taking systems down, interfering entirely with the mechanism of communication, as you put it, and that I would think would call for one particular kind of policy, which is basically a technological kind of policy. On the other hand, you're talking about content threats. And there it strikes me, this is not a new issue at all. It takes place in a different kind of technological form. But we have long dealt, in this country particularly, with issues of hate speech, incitement. Probably the Xerox machine became a threat, radio became a threat, telephone became a threat, And the question there becomes, how do we balance what we have for hundreds of years understood are the possibility of government overreaching and real threats that can come out of speech? So aren't we talking about two different kinds of policies? And if we are, might we not need two different kinds of people or groups or institutions to be looking at possible solutions?
Absolutely. That is what I said a moment ago about conduit versus content. The conduits, the wires and switches, is a completely different world from the content. The Constitution, First Amendment, that Ellen pointed out, absolutely drives our first thought about what we should do for content has to be the freedom of speech, First Amendment. What does that tell us? And then beyond that, we have other laws, privacy laws, other things on the book for the content. The one piece, though, that's different right now about the Internet, we've had problems with intellectual property and things like that, but right now we have a theft problem where when we steal something, we don't physically remove it, we don't deny your access to it. We've essentially made a copy of it, and you don't even know that it's gone. And we have a millisecond world of interconnectivity between different societies, where previously in a newspaper, radio, other kind of world of media movement, there was always a long delay, a lag time, particularly between societies that had completely different value systems and governments that could filter. Today on the Internet, none of that's there. We have society talking to each other in milliseconds where there is no government filtering, there's no religious filtering, there's none of that. So we have a collision of content that we've never had to deal with before. And so it is a rich policy area that we need a lot of thinking to go into about what does this mean for our country, what does it mean for the planet as this collision has happened. And that's not the conduit, wired side. That's, as you point out, that's a completely different policy area.
Forrest?
I would say I'd take a look at it, the issue a little bit differently. The whole second part that you talked about, I wouldn't even consider that necessarily a cybersecurity issue. I mean, 'cause like you said, it's not unique to cyberspace. It's certainly potentially a national security issue, but not necessarily a cybersecurity issue. I would say from a cybersecurity perspective is mostly the first part that you talked about. And even then, I'm not sure if the policy we're talking about is necessarily technology policy, because it's still about the actions that, if we go from the premise that Marcus said here, we built it so we can change it, we have the technology in place for a lot of the fixes. Really, it's the decision is do we want to implement that or do we want to do something else, fundamentally different as far as how we want to organize and hold people responsible for their actions in securing cyberspace. So again, the concern is if you just look at, well, it's a technology issue, then the danger with that is you say, okay, you technology people, you go deal with it. And I think the only person here at the table, and I apologize if I offend, but I think the only technologist is Marcus.
Not offended at all.
Yeah, Marcus is the only technology person of the three policy people here, and I think Ellen's. So you're kind of new to the technology piece too. So I would be hesitant to even consider it necessarily a technology issue. It may be created a lot by technology, as guys here, but it's not a technology policy issue. If that makes sense.
Okay. This gentleman, and then we'll do Monty Tripp after him.
I'm Steve Dicus from Vermont Law School. How far are we from a coherent national policy that cuts across all federal agencies to provide a coordinated response to a concerted cyber attack on the nation's infrastructure? And how are we going to get there?
It's all yours.
I think there are different layers or different levels in terms of where we need to be and when we will get there. Right now, the Department of Homeland Security is working on a national incident response plan that is intended to coordinate the activities of different federal agencies. It's also intended to discuss how we work with state and locals, and they've been working with the private sector to try and work out what is the role of the non-federal entities that, and especially the key private sector players that need to play a role here, especially the folks that run these networks. I think that everyone agrees there are. I don't know that this document will be the end-all, be-all. I think there are outstanding legal questions that that folks feel need to be answered. One of the issues that was raised is, Does DoD get involved at some point? If so, how do they get involved? Who makes that decision? And at General Alexander, who was confirmed to be the head of Cyber Command for DoD, at his confirmation hearing, a lot of what was brought out was these are questions that we need to work out. And so I think that there will be a cut at this response plan that will lay out folks' responsibilities, but I think it will be an evolution. And I think, in the one particular area I mentioned, I think DoD and DHS are trying to work out who supports whom when. So and when you're talking about a huge role for the private sector, and the federal government does not control the private sector, working out a document that ensures people will act and ensures some level of accountability, but also isn't telling people to do things when you don't have the authority to tell them to do them is a bit of a challenge.
Ellen, you've dealt a bit with the confirmation process for General Alexander. It's my understanding that he would, if confirmed as the head of Cyber Command under STRATCOM, he would still retain his directorship of NSA. Is that complementary,
That's right.
Or is that too much authority or power with one person? I don't quite understand how or why he would be performing both roles.
That's right. It's called dual hatting. He retained the directorship of the NSA, and at the same time as he would head Cyber Command. And in fact, the two Cyber Command would be co-located with NSA at Fort Meade. The rationale given behind that is that to a large degree, a lot of the skills and experience for protecting the DoD networks and classified networks reside at NSA. They're the ones who've had long experience doing that. So it only makes sense to leverage that expertise. I think in practice, he'll maybe leave the running of the day-to-day running of the agency, the NSA, to the deputy. And because he will be taking on a huge new role in running Cyber Command. There's been I think part of the reason his confirmation was delayed was there were questions on the Hill about the degree to which NSA would be involved with Cyber Command, and just how would the two agencies work together, an intelligence agency and a cyber security agency that also had, offensive powers. Cyber Command would bring together offense and defense. That was partly, up to the administration to figure out some of the policy questions, and I think they've made enough progress that the Hill feels comfortable with it. So they confirmed General Alexander just last Friday, I guess it was. At his hearing, he, as Deborah said, he was candid in saying that I think one of the biggest problems or challenges facing Cyber Command will be in trying to work out how it will work with DHS in assisting, protecting critical infrastructure, because that is in fact written into its its charter. It's what it's supposed to do is not just protect DoD and classified systems, but when called upon to do so, assist in protecting the civilian systems and the private sector. And just how you go about doing that, well, that's the big challenge, the big question.
Forrest, any comments?
Well, General Alexander answered the questions to the satisfaction of Congress, and so Cyber Command is being established. That's important. To the question about national policy, I think one of the things that we're very much focused on is we understand that every single scenario is going to be unique. Every single scenario is going to be unique. As Deborah mentioned, the Department of Homeland Security has the lead for pretty much any scenario that we're currently considering as far as a threat on critical infrastructure. But every situation is unique, and what we have to do as the federal government to include and not just the federal government, but also including state and local governments, is figure out how to respond, how to understand the situation rapidly and develop a response, a coordinated response rapidly. The quicker we can understand the situation, what that specific threat is and what its implications are, the quicker that we can make the determination for that specific scenario who should be doing what. We have a general framework developed, and what we're doing now is the policy to really focus on is the policy of getting us together quickly, coordinating our actions quickly, developing a common picture quickly, which requires support from the private sector, by the way. I mean, the national policy isn't just about a federal government response. It includes, heavily a response from the private sector, coming up with a combined situational awareness and then figuring out how to respond. And if it's not an existential threat, if it doesn't require immediate military response support, the Department of Defense may not play a major role. The role that we may play is just providing expertise. And that is one of the reasons that we're developing Cyber Command as we are, is to leverage the expertise, the very limited expertise, I'll add, from a DoD perspective, that we have in securing just the Department of Defense in cyberspace. We need to leverage the expertise that we have, and so it's important for us to work closely. It's important for General Alexander's two organizations to work closely from that perspective. One thing that policy can do for us is to encourage America's youth to get into this field, because we're not on that path. We're not on the path of developing, future cybersecurity experts that can get a national security clearance, so we can broaden out the realm that we need, or the expertise that we need to in something that is, currently classified. That's something that I have no control over. That's just, that is just the way it is. But we need to have, American citizens involved in education and involved in this field, so that we can bring them into the right environment so that they can do what they need to do, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector. We're making, and I think I can speak, from my interactions with the Department of Homeland Security, they're making great efforts to improve the access of information to a lot of critical players within the private sector as well. And that is, I know, one of their number one priorities, because of this, overcoming this, this perception that the federal government has all this really cool information. We know exactly what's going to happen, but if they don't tell us, there's nothing we can do about it. We need to work on that perception. We need to work a lot on that perception. And I know DHS, who has a lead if interacting with most of the private infrastructure, private industry, they're making great efforts towards that end.
Mm-hmm.
Monty Tripp first.
This is more directed to Deborah than anybody else, but when you talked about your legislation, there were a number of points there. I didn't hear anything about resources, but I did hear about a cyber core. Would they be the equivalent of what NSA and DoD are doing together and working, DHS and Department of Justice, FBI, cyber cops? How does it work, and what kind of resources does it take to make something effective?
I don't know that I didn't mean to use the term cyber core. I think what you're referring to is that the bill will seek to address some of the challenges in recruiting and hiring the federal workforce, people that have the necessary expertise. This is very sort of DC and technical, but the way the Office of Personnel Management categorizes jobs right now, the way the tools they give agencies to ask for the people that they need doesn't really fit in the cybersecurity space. And so part of that needs to be reformed. I will say, on the subject of resources, I will cop out and say we're an authorizing committee. So what we do is we set the policy and authorize the funds, and then work with the appropriators to actually appropriate resources. I will say it's well, at least Senator Lieberman's belief that there are going to need to be additional resources put towards this issue, especially if new legislation is implemented, and that's sort of a Congress coordinating effort going forward.
I guess this is maybe an unfair question since you're an authorizer, but one report recently said that notwithstanding the president's emphasis on budgeting priorities for cybersecurity, that his budget for 2011 actually comes in lower than it was for 2010 for DHS and its cybersecurity programs. Is that true, and what's going on there?
It is true. I think that there are a couple of things going on there. Number one, we're in a, I think the government across the board is sort of being told to tighten its belts. Number two, the budget came out right after the Christmas Day attack. And so I think there were some funds, this is sort of my opinion, I think there were some funds juggled around from different pieces of DHS to go towards programs and technologies that could address that particular threat. And I will say, while we want to see that budget going up in terms of DHS cybersecurity activities, with the current staff they have, they only have a certain capacity to spend per year. And I will say if you look at sort of what was cut item by item, one or two were earmarks or specific programs that they weren't necessarily seeing a return on. There were some things that I think we were concerned that they were reducing the funding for. But it's not sort of a one answer fits all. But I think generally we're looking to see that number go up.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Dave Campen. I'm a researcher with the EPA. One of the issues that I guess I sort of see in recent times is the advent of the iPad and the extreme rapid uptake of that device. And I wonder whether really there is an opportunity for more of a market intervention here of actually having the producers of hardware become much more involved in developing the security side of the sort of cyberspace. So we actually have an influx of of devices which actually provide that security without actually dealing with the much broader billions of contacts to actually accelerate security. I just wonder whether Ellen might have a view on that matter.
Well, I'm not again a technologist, but I think supply chain is one of the big issues that we face and we need to look at. Some people have talked, I believe, about trying to get standards or best processes worked in through maybe the acquisition process at DoD and maybe even through DHS, but I'm not I don't know the details of those, so I'd have to defer to others on that.
This is a question for Marcus.
Yeah, I'll just give you a brief answer. It's a business question. It's a business process. Apple, like Google, Verizon, anybody else, has a profit and a loss column, and they've got a product. They have to compete. They have to do better than their competition if they want to survive. Unfortunately, security is still not in that equation yet. It's how quickly can I get something out to the market that my customers will buy. I hope it's secure. Once the first customers get it, we'll find out if it's secure or not. These devices are highly complex, far beyond anything we've even thought about 10, 15, 20 years ago. It is not a bad mark on some company that comes out with a highly complex device that has faults in it. It happens. If you want them to come out fault-free, it could take 10 or 15 years of development. I mean, look at what the DoD has gone through over the decades trying to create various types of hardware machinery that never fly, never get deployed. 10, 15, 20 years go by and they still can't get the thing to roll out because of all types of problems. In the IT world, you don't have 10 or 15 years. It's not even 10 or 15 months, from idea to rollout. So I wouldn't fault too much the insecurity of these highly complex devices. We as society have to recognize that if we want the latest, the best, the greatest, in the world we live in right today, they're not going to be completely secure first time out. We'll have to learn how to secure them. But I'll go back to my earlier comment about it is all man-made, and we don't have to live with the situation we're in. We can start adopting lots of new ways of doing business. It's just, are we willing to afford it? Are we willing to pay the premium to get something that has trusted chips, trusted software, built-in factories that we have control over, or do we want the cheapest, the fastest, the quickest, which is sort of where the market drives us. And it's a very hard balance to walk the line between both of those.
So that's a question back to you. Would you be prepared to pay for an iPad that costs probably 4 times, at least 4 times as much, to ensure that trusted foundry and all those things that Marcus just talked about? Or would you be prepared for the risk of it maybe not being as secure based on what you use it for?
Well, in terms of financial transactions, I probably would.
Okay. And that may be the right answer that we need to start considering.
Well, and this goes back to an earlier comment about, is the market failing? We hear this a lot, that the market fails when it comes to security. Well, if taken through the lens of devices, software, other things get sold that are insecure, yeah, the market fails. But if the market is based on supply and demand, then that means there's not a lot of demand for secure devices. If there was a demand for it, there would be a market. There would be a supply system. And so as consumers, we have to start demanding these things. If we're not demanding them as consumers, the product manufacturers aren't going to deliver. We're happy with the insecure devices, in other words.
That's a new challenge for Cybersecurity Awareness Month in October, then, not just to secure the devices you have, but demand devices that are more secure.
Well, I think what we have to be careful there is that because of that issue, we have to make sure we don't kind of paint ourselves into a technology corner, so that and then when we get there, we say, oh, you know what, we probably should have something more secure, but now we're in a position where trying to get to that level of security is going to be impossible, and so.
And a related issue is sort of to what degree might we give up some anonymity on the internet in exchange for more security? It's another question for policymakers too.
Okay, this gentleman right here. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to add one other piece. It was one of the arguments behind pushing the federal government to buy things that have sort of security baked in is the argument that the federal government is a huge customer, and if companies are already thinking about a certain level of security as they go through the production process, that will trickle down to what they're selling to the average American. Some people challenge whether that is what would take hold, but I think that's also one hope behind trying to increase the security of what the federal government buys.
Let me point out, and I know we'll move over, there is a case of that happening, and that's the federal core desktop configuration.
Federal
desktop core configuration, right. This came out of an effort between the Air Force and Microsoft, where the Air Force, Microsoft, and I believe NSA was involved as well, said we need to come up with a configuration for Windows XP that is far more secure than the out-of-the-box configuration. They worked on it. They came up with it. It's literally a template. It's publicly available. Anybody can use it. And this is a case where the federal government drove security through their procurement, came up with software that is much more secure than it was, and now anybody can use it. There's no extra cost to it. It's just a template that you apply. So there are cases like that where we really can drive security through government procurement, and then it falls back into society and others that can then use them. So kind of a reuse of security.
Sir, you will have the last question. Identify yourself, please.
Yes, my name is Harry Wingo. I work for Google. I'm in the D.C. office. I really wanted to follow up on that last point because at Google we think that security definitely is something that's important to our consumers. It's part and parcel of the services we provide for trust, for privacy, for so many reasons. And actually devices, you're going to see the market respond. Google, for example, we're coming out with netbooks very soon. With our Chrome OS operating system, and we think that we're rethinking or rebooting the approach to doing consumer-level computing. These new machines are going to be built with cloud computing in mind from the beginning. They're actually going to be designed to keep you out of trouble online, and we think this is something that consumers will definitely appreciate. We're approaching this with an open source type of approach. We know that this is something recently at DoD has actually considered looking at open source and coding. Doesn't mean that you have to reveal everything that you're doing, but if you're developing something in that type of environment, it can make a big difference. That means that the bad guys have to be smarter, not just than your team, but then everybody who's looking at this. So my question, though, after that comment about Chrome OS and Netbook, and I just couldn't resist that because we think this is something very important to consumers. It's a big investment when you buy a computer, but also smartphones. There's so many different devices that consumers are going to use, and we can remake how the security works, and there's other things that we're doing on that front too, from SSL, making as a default your searches, but actually for your emails being safe using HTTPS. But I wanted to ask, what are you seeing on the for your perspectives for consumers? Actually, every day people actually for this registering with them. Is it coming up to the hill as far as people being concerned? Then also for folks on the government side, for people who are actually users of this every day, asking to see changes implemented on this front.
Well, a couple of things from our consumers. One is that they would like the internet and cyberspace to just work. and make the problem go away. In other words, I'm already paying you $50 a month for this device, $100 for that, just make it work. The other side of it, and it's a fair thought, by the way, the other side of it, which we can really leverage, is one of parental control. So children who are connected, children that are online, that are texting, using things like that, so that parents can have control over what kids are doing. If you go at it from that approach, where we start building parental controls into the technology, it's just like the reuse through government procurement of security systems. We wind up building security into products so that parents can use that for their kids. And oh, by the way, it turns out it works just as well for the parents, the grandparents, friends, and relatives and others. So it's we're going at it a different direction, saying if maybe we can apply it as a parental control measure, start investing in that because our consumers do want it and market it as such. And then it has the fallout that, oh, by the way, it also raises security for everybody else. So you wind up getting it without realizing that you're getting it.
Well, we have what? What?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, yes.
He was
Go
just
ahead.
asking about the Hill.
Yeah.
I would just say that we hear about these issues a lot more from folks in different companies, media, people with who have jobs to think about things.